it's a label. It's a way to show the Europeanness and that potentially the UK can contribute to European strategic autonomy. So in that sense, it's very important. And I do think London should reconsider at least its posture of not wanting to pay to be able to play, because playing will also benefit British jobs and British industry.
Now, let us talk about defence then. Britain is ready to walk away from the European Union's Defence Fund scheme, which is due to the cost of it, the demand that we would pay billions to join the scheme. Ukraine has meanwhile become a testing ground for modern warfare, with analysis pointing to the need for smaller, cheaper weapons in place of large, expensive technology. So let's talk about some of this with Fabrice Pothier, the former head of NATO policy planning. Welcome back to the programme, Fabrice.
See you, John.
Hi. So, Fabrice, I wonder what you make of the news that Britain is not, after all, going to be engaging in the market for weapons under the EU's defence fund. It doesn't want to pay the necessary billions of euros. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a loss to European defence, do you think?
Well, frankly, I think it's a lose-lose, because it's a way for the UK to obviously plug with some significant EU programs. But beyond that, it's a way for the UK to come back into the European defence fold. And given the British defence industry's size and the type of systems and weapons available there, I think it would be a lose-lose for both the UK not to be able to benefit from what Europe is trying to do now on the European defence front, but it's also a loss for European defence in not having access to some of the British know-how and technology.
Yes. So you then share the view, do you, that this multi-billion euro fee just to bid for contracts paid for out of EU funds, that's a piece of what would you describe it? EU protectionism?
Well, maybe that sounds a bit like a post-Brexit way of putting it, John. But I would say, first, you should not overstate the importance of EU programs. It sounds like a lot, but in the end, for example, you have SAFE, which is 150 billion, but these are loans. And altogether, the European Union, mainly the European Commission, doesn't represent actually a very big chunk of European defense spending. I think we're talking about between 5 to 8% of total European defense spending. However, it's a label. It's a way to show the Europeanness and that potentially the UK can contribute to European strategic autonomy. So in that sense, it's very important. And I do think London should reconsider at least its posture of not wanting to pay to be able to play, because playing will also benefit British jobs and British industry.
Yeah, so as you say, Europe is by far the biggest market for British defence firms, although the European fund buying weapons out of that EU fund, that is a comparatively small part of all of this. I think 150 billion euros was the figure that was mentioned. But nonetheless, and I sense here that pretty clearly that you are sympathetic to this view, British firms do have an edge in key areas, don't they? Like aerospace technology and like AI. It seems arguably counterproductive not to let Britain at least, or invite Britain, make it easier for Britain to at least bid for that EU fund too.
Yes, but the argument from our European continental friends is that the UK cannot have it both ways. They cannot both have access to the European market and not want to actually end some of the European programs and not want to actually pay some due similar to Norway or Switzerland or other, European economic area members. So I think there has to be a deal here. Again, to move away from this lose-lose situation, which I would deplore, into more of a win-win, where London will be more anchored into this new European defense that is taking shape right now.
Okay, go on, just to look at Ukraine with you just for a moment. Really interesting piece in the Times now about the way that Ukraine is pushing the frontier of technical development and knowledge when it comes to military technology and drone technology in particular. Just talk to us about that.
Well, Ukraine has been really at the edge of this new warfare, using drones to compensate for the lack of mass, mostly of soldiers, but also for the lack of artillery, at least in comparison to Russia. However, whatever success the Ukrainians have achieved, and we really have to commend that in very difficult conditions, we should not underestimate the Russians' capacity to adapt, innovate. And right now, if you had to look at the dynamic, at least at the tactical operational level on the front line, the Russians have managed to regain some form of edge, and not just in artillery and sacrificing sometimes close to 1,000 soldiers a day, which is obviously enormous, and no democracies will ever be able to do that, but also in how it is using drones and unmanned technologies to actually create pressure on both the Ukrainian soldiers, but sadly also the Ukrainian population.
And when this war eventually ends, Ukraine will have the largest and most battle-hardened force of military in Europe, other than Russia, of course, compared by size and battle experience to other countries who are within NATO. Is the idea of Ukraine as a NATO member eventually, is that remotely realistic? Is that still a real idea?
For sure, the idea here is that Ukraine will and is already become de facto a flank holder. They are holding the eastern flank because of their capacity to basically hold the Russian pressure. Because at the end, if you take a much bigger picture here and step back, you will see that in something like 10 years, one of the most formidable and largest armies in the world, Russia, has not been able to prevail against what used to be a fairly mediocre army, which is now a much more formidable European army. So Ukraine has become de facto the holder of this wall. The question is whether it will carry on doing that in the kind of outside the Euro-Atlantic institution, or it should be doing that inside. In my view, there is a much better benefit, not just for Ukraine, but for us to have them integrated in our institutions and planning, because it creates more certainty. It also puts them at the standard and norms of NATO, and it creates a certain kind of higher level of political control, which right now we don't have. It's not that we have to have it, but I think it will create a more collective value, which now is more multinational, ad hoc-ish one.
Fabrice Pothier, former head of NATO's policy planning. Good to have you on the program as always.
Pleasure.
Fabrice.
Is it time for Congress to move legislation that puts pressure on Russia and puts pressure on Putin?
Well, I hear they're doing that, and that's okay with me. They're passing legislation, or the Republicans are putting in legislation that very tough. It's sanctioning, et cetera, on any country doing business with Russia. They may add Iran to that, as you know. I suggested it. So any country that does business with Russia will be very severely sanctioned. We may add Iran to the formula, yeah.